We have to go to the Dallas area, Fort Worth specifically. 2 days of jury deliberations ended with a manslaughter conviction against that former Fort Worth police officer, Aaron Dean. His trial now moving to the punishment and sentencing phase. He was found guilty of manslaughter by a jury there in Fort Worth for the police shooting death of Atatiana Jefferson. Right now, let's go out to Fox 4 Dallas reporter Dion Anglin with more on this. And Dion, thanks so much for being with us. You were following this story. You have been throughout the course of this trial. What is the reaction like, and who have you spoken with today?
Well, hi there, Andrew. Definitely, there was tension, anger, a lot of emotion that spilled from the courtroom after the verdict was read. Gallery watchers, many supporters of Atatiana Jefferson's family, all expressing themselves in the hallways and doing so very vocally. Now, it was just after Judge George Gallagher announced the jury's decision. Well, there was no obvious reaction from the defendant himself, former officer Aaron Dean, when that verdict was read. Atatiana Jefferson's family, no outward reaction or emotion either. Her siblings did leave the courtroom immediately. Now, outside the courtroom, it was a very different story. The majority of the crowd saying that manslaughter was not good enough, saying they wanted a murder conviction. They feel Dean should have been found guilty of the charged murder. Now, though some others were relieved, saying it was that they're just happy it was not an acquittal.
Manslaughter carries 2 to 20. You know, Aaron Dean's bond should be held insufficient this evening. He should be spending the night in jail. And that's something that hadn't happened in Tarrant County. This is a first, you know, but I'm glad, you know, when everybody was talking about the makeup of the jury and everything, that these folks gave a good, hard look at the evidence, and they didn't rush it.
There's a bar to meet for murder, and the bar was not met in this jury's opinion. That bar was never met. But they did say admit manslaughter, and manslaughter, a guilty verdict is better than a not guilty verdict.
And you agree with the verdict?
I agree with the verdict.
Now, Aaron Dean's family left the courtroom sometime after the hallway emptied somewhat. They did not make any statement. Now, Aaron Dean is in custody tonight, now convicted of manslaughter. We should note that witnesses and many others directly connected to the trial are still under a gag order and cannot provide their reaction. The judge made a decision to end the proceedings for today. The next phase is the sentencing phase, which involves more witnesses and more evidence to be considered by the jury. Now, manslaughter carrying a possible 2 to 20 years in prison under certain circumstances. It can involve probation. Now, that sentencing phase gets underway here first thing tomorrow morning. It's the very latest live here in Fort Worth. Andrew, back to you.
Dion, I'm curious, do Dean's attorneys plan to appeal, and has the Fort Worth Police Department issued any reaction to this?
There's been no reaction from the city or the police department, although there was a city council person who was here, heard the verdict read. He said he would rather reserve any comment for a later time, so we did not speak with him. He was present, though. As far as the attorneys appealing, that is a standard thing. We can definitely, I feel, look forward to an appeal being filed in this verdict. But we will proceed tomorrow with the sentencing phase. Andrew?
All right, Dion Anglin there live for us in Fort Worth. Dion, quite the culmination to this trial. Thanks for bringing it to our viewers here on Live Now. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
Okay, and in the meantime, we want to walk you back to see in court the moment the verdict was read by the judge, some reaction like Dion was describing from some people, including some family members and friends of Atatiana Jefferson, who are not quite happy with the verdict that was reached. Obviously, they were hoping for a more serious charge and a more serious conviction. The manslaughter charge, though, stands, and we're going to get the sentencing tomorrow for that former Fort Worth police officer, Aaron Dean. Let's go back, though, from this afternoon so you can watch it from earlier.
Defense? Yes. Members of the gallery, I have appreciated everything that you have done throughout this trial. We are at a point that a lot of people have been waiting for, but there can be nothing that occurs when I announce this verdict. I have no idea what the verdict is. There can be no outbursts. There can be no demonstrations. There can be no response in this courtroom. If you think you cannot control yourself, step outside and go next door. I will not hesitate to impose sanctions for people who violate this admonition. Does everyone understand?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's bring in the jury. Everyone may be seated. Good afternoon. Mr. Presiding Juror, it is my understanding that the jury has reached a verdict. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is it a unanimous verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
If you can, please, Deputy Nicholson. Mr. Dean, if you would stay. Oh, sorry about that. Verdict reads, we, the jury, find the defendant Aaron York Dean guilty of the offense of manslaughter as signed by the presiding juror. Does either side desire a poll?
The state does not, Your Honor. We do, Your Honor.
You may be seated. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to call your juror number, okay? And the question I'm going to ask you is this manslaughter verdict your individual verdict? Juror number 1, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 3, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 4, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 6, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 14, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 15, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 21, is this your verdict? I'm sorry? Okay. Juror number 31, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 32, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 37, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Juror number 38, is this your verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, your verdict will be received and filed, and I'm going to ask you to step back into the jury room for a few minutes. We are now back under the rules that we were under. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves because we will go into the punishment phase. I need to discuss with the lawyers timing on that. So give us just a few minutes and I'll be back in a few minutes. All rise. Everyone may be seated. I need to see the lady on the back row. Come up, please, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Come on up. Can you tell me who you are, please, ma'am?
My name is Peyton Jackson.
And Ms. Jackson, was there a portion of my instructions that you did not understand?
No,
So why were you causing a ruckus at the end when I was talking to the jury?
I wasn't.
Well, it obviously was. You're not allowed to come.
Okay, so you were watching the punishment the jury's verdict, rather, in that courtroom there in Fort Worth. Let's watch yet again, and we'll also show some of the reaction from after this, too. Okay, and Aaron Dean there, after he learned of what the jury returned there, that manslaughter conviction, many people were caught on camera by some of our reporters outside of the courtroom with their reaction. Let's listen to one of them.
Police! Just racist! Police!
What are your thoughts?
Well, we're glad that a sentence has come forth. This family has waited for a really long time. We think the appropriate sentence was murder.
Damn right it was murder.
I don't
Not
know.
less, but murder.
I don't know that the confines of the gag will allow me to get into the whys, seeing that there's still a sentencing phase. So I think I'll hold my statements until then.
How do we find the Fort Worth police guilty?
Not since the verdict is read. They were moved out of the courtroom and we're going to join them now.
They put the whip on us. Don't tell me to be quiet. Don't tell me to be quiet because you can't police me. You can't police me, man. You can't tell me to be quiet. You can't put me in shackles.
Okay, so very angry people outside of the courtroom there. Let's listen into more reaction after the verdict came down.
Justice. I don't feel like justice was served in this case, but you know, I guess a guilty verdict is better than not guilty.
He shot that girl. Manslaughter. Not murder, but manslaughter. I mean, he get to walk. He walks. There's no admission that he killed that girl. Manslaughter, that's what you get is do. And we expect justice from these people? We expect justice?
First time a Fort Worth police officer's ever been charged and convicted of killing a citizen while on duty. I think it's the appropriate conviction, charge of manslaughter. I didn't think it met the bar of murder. That is the intent, meaning he intended to kill her. He did kill her, and the jury found, in my opinion, that he was reckless and it caused the death of someone else. They didn't buy the argument that he was in fear of his life.
Okay, so some varying degrees of opinions there in the reaction after the verdict was handed down. Manslaughter, not first-degree murder in the police shooting death of Atatiana Jefferson back in 2019. Aaron Dean will learn his fate. The sentencing phase will be handed down tomorrow. We spoke with a legal expert here on Live Now about this case, about why the jury returned the manslaughter conviction and not a first-degree murder conviction, about what it means that Aaron Dean testified in his own defense as well on the stand. Here's this conversation with Live Now's Andy Mack.
The big news of the day coming down out of Texas, Aaron Dean found guilty of manslaughter. And we want to get a little bit more insight into why this verdict came to be. We're going to be joined right now by Matt Timpanic, a criminal defense attorney with Timpanic Law. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox, Matt. First off, obviously, the verdict came in manslaughter and guilty. What do we take away from this verdict?
From the lengthy deliberations, I think it was roughly 11 hours, that tells me there was some serious discourse between the jurors, meaning that I think some of them wanted him to find guilty of murder, and I think others wanted him found guilty of maybe a lesser or not guilty. Usually when jurors can't come to an agreement on a charge and there is a lesser included, they do what's called a compromise verdict. That means is that, okay, these jurors want not guilty, these jurors want murder. Let's split the baby and find a middle ground that we can all agree on. Because otherwise, if all jurors do not agree on a verdict, the case ends in a mistrial. Thus, to be able to avoid that situation, the jurors came together and decided, let's find him guilty of manslaughter. That's what the law and the facts support.
And give me a breakdown of the difference, because those were the three options: guilty of manslaughter, guilty of murder, or not guilty entirely. What's the difference between guilty of murder and guilty of manslaughter?
In the state of Texas, if you are found guilty of murder, you can be sentenced to up to 99 years in prison, which is essentially a life sentence if the judge so wishes. However, our manslaughter conviction is only a second-degree felony in the state of Texas, punishable by a minimum of 2 years in prison and a maximum of 20 years in prison, The thinking being is that that individual, if they don't have any other issues, will get out of prison someday. However, based on what I heard at the trial and the facts and evidence, I think the judge is going to sentence the defendant, if it were, to more likely about 10 years.
Definitely, as you say, that was certainly an interesting point, because obviously 99 years is basically a life sentence, so he won't get that. Taking us back a little bit to this trial in this case, because it was a very interesting trial. Aaron Dean, a former Fort Worth police officer in this instance, he took the stand himself, and obviously he could have pled the Fifth Amendment and not testified, not have to do that. Do you think it helped his case, or do you think it maybe hurt his case to take the stand?
I don't think it helped or hurt his case. If he did not take the stand, the jury is instructed not to hold that against them. That is the law. However, it's still common sense for a jury to be like, okay, why didn't he take the stand? And be like, what does he not want us to know? When you take the stand in this case, you were trying to put the jury in the same position that you were in the time of the incident in question. This Aaron Dean showed up to this house thinking that there was a burglary in process, fired, and unfortunately killed Ms. Jefferson in this case. And as such, when he took the stand to try to explain that, the jury, based on finding him guilty of manslaughter, were of the belief that he was an officer. He probably should have done things much differently, and this situation should have never happened.
And I think a lot of people are saying that this situation should have never happened. And obviously Aaron Dean, we just talked about that, taking the stand, but also another key witness was Atatiana Jefferson's nephew, Zion Carr, who took the stand. He's just a kid under the age of 10, just 8 years old at the time of the shooting. How does that factor in when a witness, the key witness, that testimony is a little bit different from when he said on 2019 to now, and he's just a kid, so it's a very traumatic moment for him. How does that impact a case like this with a young kid on the stand?
When a young kid testifies in a criminal case, you are trying to get that emotional response from a jury. When the jury's deliberating, you as the prosecutor don't want them to be like, well, I think it was an accident, we should find him not guilty and move on. With her son testifying, they wanted the jury to know, obviously, what he saw in the incident in question, but also that there was an emotional toll from this, that a boy is not going to have his mother for the rest of his life, and that the action by Aaron Dean should not go unpunished. He was an officer. He should have known better. He should have used his training and experiences to approach the situation differently. And I think that's part of the reason the jury found him guilty of manslaughter.
And also, obviously, now the jury has reached the verdict and the guilty verdict in manslaughter. Are there any other ways, obviously, appeals for Aaron Dean, and how will that process shake out?
I think undoubtedly Aaron Dean's going to be sentenced to some kind of prison. I'm thinking upwards of 10 years based on prior precedent in other cases. But I think he will appeal this situation, but I don't know if it'll be particularly successful. Watching the trial, I don't know if I saw any errors in law by the judge, and the verdict definitely supports the evidence. It's not, if a jury makes a verdict that is notwithstanding the evidence, the judge can set that aside, and the judge hasn't, and I don't expect the judge to.
And also, as we continue on, we also always talk about it where there's a criminal case and now potentially a civil case. Is that something that we could see from the Jefferson family, from Zion Carr, the nephew? Is that in the realm of things, just based on past history we've seen in other cases, other high-profile cases that come to mind, like Breonna Taylor, like George Floyd? There's a bunch of other cases involving police. Is a civil case something that could be on the horizon as well?
I absolutely think a civil case is on the horizon. I think Ms. Jefferson's son will file a lawsuit against the police department, and I think that in the city itself, and I think ultimately it will result in a monetary settlement.
Definitely. Matt Timpanek, thank you so much for joining us. Are there any parting words you want to leave our audience, or anything else that you want to talk about this case with?
Nope.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox.